Hi, I'm Kyle. I'm the English department head at L.A. Matheson Secondary in Surrey, British Columbia, and I'm also the president of the BC Teachers of English Language Arts. I'm really excited to share with you today, but first I want to acknowledge whose land I'm on. This is the land of the Semiahmoo, the Katzie, the Tsawwassen, the Stolo, the Saanich, and Kwantlen, and those nations have shared this land since time immemorial, and they've never actually ceded this land to any other government. So I'm grateful to be an uninvited guest on their land. I am in the midst of moving, so forgive the very plain background. I moved a fig tree behind me to give you a little something to look at. If you want to follow along, I posted slides on the NCTE website, and you can also just click on, use the link at the bottom of this page to find those same files. I've numbered the slides, so I'll tell you what number I'm on when I get there. I'm just going to switch right now to the second slide. So you can see on slide 2, there's downloading files. And then we're going to slide along to slide 3 for objectives. What do we want to get out of this? Well, I'm thinking about side-by-side assessment. I'm thinking about Gradeless. I'm thinking about being in assessment together with your students. So I want you to walk out of this thinking, I can help my students believe in their own potential growth. And I want you to think, I can guide students through self-regulation processes. And I definitely want you to be able to empower your students to track and share their own learning. I think when your students are in charge of their learning, it's the most powerful and most empowering. So how are we going to do that? We're going to look at, well, what's the purpose of assessment? We'll look at a little bit of research framework, then how to go gradeless, or at least how I've gone gradeless in my own classroom. Then I'll leave a little space for you to investigate the files that I've been sharing and to reflect on what you want to do with them. So I'm going to switch now to slide 5, and I'm wondering, what purpose does grading serve in your classroom? For me, I only grade because I'm required by law, of course. I don't think grading is as powerful for my students as feedback. I give feedback because I want my students to grow. They deserve to grow, and I would rather give that feedback to students and give that same kind of feedback to parents because I want everybody in the loop and I want them pushing forward. However, what I've learned is that grading is a really deflating way of getting kids a progress report. It's reductive and it demotivates them. So I'm going to switch to slide 6. For me, my classroom right now focuses on feedback. There are no percents or letter grades until required or unless I'm required. Right now for grades 8 and 9, we do not have to give letter grades. We can use proficiency language. I'll tell you more about that in a second. And for my grade 10, 11, 12s, I have to give a percentage at the end of a semester, or for grade 12s in April when their university applications are due. But when I say proficiency language, I'm talking about a scale of progress, but not a letter grade scale. In our province, we use the language emerging, developing, proficient, extending, with emerging being the lower end and extending being the high end. But different places use different wording. The idea is not the same as letter grades. There's not a fail on that list. It's just a sequence. You're somewhere on this scale. So it's hard to jump from one to the other, but we're going to try today. Slide 7, we'll get into some of the research. Alfie Cohen's The Case Against Grades. He talks in that about some of the damaging ways that grades affect students. He says, for example, that grades diminish student interest in whatever they're learning. It takes them out of what they're learning. Grades create a preference for the easiest task. They go for the sure thing instead of the exploration and the learning. And then grades tend to reduce the quality of students' thinking. So all these things sound terrible. They do not sound like what I want my students to focus their time on. I've also learned that students who focus on achievement over stress, which seems like a bad thing during a pandemic, or any time really, and they cause less cooperation for grades cause less cooperation. Students who are struggling academically don't catch up, and really, grades make school feel unsafe. Dylan William is also another influence on my practice. I can't label a specific moment, but if you read any of his formative assessment books, those help me get to where I'm at right now. But another big impact was John Hattie's Visible Learning, and there'll be a link in the attached documents that can show you it'll show you his entire list, and it's basically a list that organizes teaching strategies by the power that they have on students. You can click through and check that out. Where we're going to go next is slide 8, how we actually do this thing. How do you frame your classroom? How do you show students how welcome they are? That's the very first thing you have to do when you're trying to bring a kid in and put them in charge of their learning. You have to show how sensitive you are to their culture and to them as a person. You want to show them your role in the room, but your role is not to control them, but to support them. You have to show them that they should grow, that you have that expectation of them. It doesn't matter who they are in the room, they have potential and they can grow. You have to show them that they can grow. Even if it's in tiny little steps, you can show them that they're making progress. Even if it's in one skill out of the 20 skills that you're working on in your course, show them in some way that they can grow and show them that you are growing too. I do that in a bunch of ways. One way is from our creative writing class, I talk about my master's. My master's was in creative writing, and I still have a lot of work to do on my writing. We're growing constantly. You can give infinite examples for that. So once you've framed your classroom for your students, you can start talking about the big picture. Now, you want to find some way of showing students the end goals. I'm on slide number 9, by the way. There's many ways to do that. 2 of the simple ones that I've used are learning maps and credos. You want to find a way for your kids to set goals for themselves. They want to see what the goals are and then set goals for themselves. So how are they going to do in those various skills? Because for each of us, we have different priorities, we have different strengths, and we know what we want to work on and we know what we're not prepared to work on. Find some way of letting them see that big picture and then setting them up to work on it. If you look at slide 10, you can see an example of a learning map. This is from Shelley Moore, an education consultant who does fantastic work. She laid out a whole bunch of things there. You can see my own examples in the attached files as well. If you look at slide 11, a very simple overall goal, a credo. I'm a growing and discerning writer, reader, and editor who has a voice, shares that voice in the school community and with a larger audience. That gives your students something to work towards. Next up, on slide 12, you can see that rubrics are the heart of a gradeless classroom. You want to give feedback, and that feedback has to be focused on skills. You have to figure out what those skills are. Many of you will have standards. For my province, we talk about curricular competencies. It's just another word for skills. What skill are we working towards? Once we label the skills that we're working on, my students and I actually go through the curriculum and we look at the skills and say, oh, this assignment is focusing on this skill and this skill and this skill. Okay, now what are we actually going to see in front of us that looks good when we're done? So I co-create that rubric. I say, okay, the skill is discussion. A good discussion has these things in it, and we label all those ideas. I use those rubrics to help students master self-regulation. I also use it to give feedback because I can sit down with kids and say, which skill are we looking at here? Okay, let's talk about that skill and how you're doing in it. It also lets me sit beside them and assess them. I don't mark face-to-face. I want to be beside somebody working together on something. We're exploring this together. We're having fun together. We have to be working on the same things on the same page. Creating a rubric is very much putting us on the same page. And lastly, we focus on proficiency language. We don't focus on grades on a rubric because we're working through formative assessment. We're working on mastery before we get to a final assignment, a final wrapping up of the skills. We don't need to worry about grades. We just need to worry about where we're at in terms of our strengths and our weaknesses. Anything else is a distraction for us. So once we've got the rubric figured out, I'm going to jump to slide 13 and 14 are going to be some examples. Slide 13 is a single point rubric, which is what I'm using exclusively these days. You can see the proficiency language on there: emerging, developing, proficient, extending. The left column, they'd write what they'd be working on to try and get better. In the middle, they just check mark if they're there, and if they're going above and beyond, they explain how. Slide 14 is where I started in my career. We use chart rubrics. I find that there's a lot of text on there, sometimes too much text for some of my students, but it has all the options that are there for a student. Slide 15 is where we go once we have the rubric. I circulate and I help my students. I focus on the task. I have conversations that are about skills instead of about control. My favorite question, I say it over and over again in my classroom. What are you thinking about? What are you trying to do there? What's your focus right now? I'm not trying to control their behavior. I know that often behavior that's acting out is a sign that they're struggling either with their focus or with the skill itself. So I want to open the door to a conversation about skills because that's why they're in my room. So I don't ask what do you think you're doing, I ask what you're thinking about. I also look for permission in my feedback, and you'll see more about that in the attached files. But I ask kids, what do you want to talk about? What do you want feedback on? And if they're open to something else, I can ask them. They can say yes to it. They can also say no, because sometimes they're not ready to talk about some things. Regardless, you're the best model in the room, so you got to be constantly circulating and giving that feedback. Slide 16 is conferencing. I have changed my practice. I don't take all the kids' assignments home anymore. If it's worth marking, then it's worth me taking class time to mark with them. So I actually sit down beside each kid and talk through their assignment. It doesn't last very long. There's not enough time to make it more than a 2-minute conversation, but they set the priorities there. They tell me what they want to hear about in particular. And if there's something else they really need to hear about, I ask if they're open to hearing about it. But if I take it all home, then they miss out on those conversations. I don't have enough time in my life to go home, mark everything, and bring it back to school. And I don't know, I would rather spend my time planning and living my life than marking. So I don't mark everything. And what I do mark, I make sure there's time in class to talk about with each kid. It's much more powerful, and kids absorb a lot more through discussion face-to-face than they do if they just get a word on a paper or even a highlighter mark on a rubric. Slide 17, you switch with me, is what they do with that. After they conference with me, after they receive some feedback, I get them to answer some questions. Halbert and Kaiser, their book Spirals of Inquiry was a British Columbia publication. They suggest these 3 questions for reflection. Where are you going with your learning? How are you doing with your learning? Where to next? And I have adapted those slightly. My kids answer the question, where are we here? What skill is going well? What skill do you want to work on? How will you work on that skill? I have had success with both, but you'll play with it and find the best wording for your own students. This semester, my grade 9s were struggling with even some of those questions, so we simplified it again, and you can see that in the attachment. If you jump to slide 18 with me, you can see a picture of portfolios. Those are some of my past students. Those look like grade 10s from 2 years ago. And they're simply using, looks like a taped together folder. And you could have a 2-sleeve, a 4-sleeve, whatever you want to do. You could fold up chart paper, make a portfolio. You could do a digital portfolio because perhaps you're at home in a pandemic. Whatever you do, though, you want to gather evidence of learning in order to have a gradeless classroom. You need some kind of evidence building up because you really want to focus on their growth. You want to show your students how they're getting better at any skill because that gives them hope. It gives them a reason to buy into what you're doing. It also allows them to track their own progress because they can look through and see, hey, I started here in this skill and I've come to here. And that actually lets them report out on their assessment. It lets them report out and decide their own mark. If you jump to slide 19 with me, report card conferences, students in my class, they self-assess. They look through that portfolio and they decide what their evidence shows their mark should be. And we're talking about proficiency language. I don't actually ask for a grade or a percent at that point. They just tell me emerging, developing, proficient, extending. And then they share the evidence of that. And you can see examples of sheets that they organize that thinking on in the files. Third step, I use my professional judgment. We have a conversation. They tell me what their thinking is. I tell them what my thinking is. And then we have to settle on a proficiency scale. Most of the time, I'd say about 80% of my students, they find the right level for themselves. And then there's outliers, 10% on either side, that shoot too high or shoot too low. And we have to talk about that. In the end, I have to apply my professional judgment, but mostly they can really choose effectively. And if they can do that themselves, why do I need to interfere? I don't even have a grade book at this point. All I do is I ask them to track their learning, and they are effective at it. And obviously there's, like I said, the outliers, but I'm always going to focus more intensely on those anyway. They'll need more help. So in the end, step 5, if I have to, like for my seniors, I'll convert to a percentage or a grade. I do it on my course outline the very first day of the course. They know how the proficiency language would line up with a grade or a percentage. I only do that when I'm required to, though, because, again, it's deflating for kids. Slide 20. This is where I hope you can spend some time. There's some files attached in the NCTE page that you clicked on. Or you can go to tinyurl.com/NCTE Gradeless, and you can see a bunch of files that I've shared with you. The files are organized in the same way that I just walked you through, I should say. So there's framing your class, learning maps, rubrics, conferencing, reflection, and reporting. And I just want you to think for yourself, what does each folder show about gradeless assessment? How might these work in your own classroom, or how are they already working in your own classroom? And on slide 21, Faye Brownlee uses these wonderful questions for reading comprehension, but I like them for everything. What do you notice about those files? Why is that important? I want you to spend some time thinking, and hopefully there's something in there that's helpful. You'll also find links in there to things like all the rubrics I've ever made. So if you're looking for assessment materials or looking for some templates to plug your own ideas into, then you can definitely borrow those, have fun with them. There is a slide 22, which just says, for yourself, as you're wrapping up your thinking, what strategies do you need to know more about before you try them yourself in your own classroom? And which strategy might you try in your classroom in the next week, month, or year? I also wonder who will keep you accountable, because just like our students, we need somebody who is riding with us, right beside us, helping us get through it. Choose somebody. If you want to choose me, that's fine. On the next slide here, I'll show you my contact information. If you have somebody who is at the same school with you, that's really excellent too, because then you can bounce ideas off each other easily. Even somebody in the same area as you. On the last slide here, slide 23, there's a short exit survey just to help me understand your experience of this session. It's really short. The survey is really short. The presentation is short too. We're given a limited amount of time, and I could talk about this for hours. If you'd like to talk more about it, feel free to contact me. My email address is there. You can find me on Twitter, and you can also see my class website, which is where you'll get links to all kinds of rubrics and other materials. As well, the session files are linked one more time right there. I really appreciate you spending a little bit of the conference with me. Thank you. Please reach out if you feel like it, and take care. Bye.